Hi everyone. Today I'm going to finish the short story that we've been reading called Starlight and Moondust by Lori M. Hlee, a story from Color Outside the Lines, which is a collection of short stories edited by Sangu Mandanna. So we've met Hlee and Argus. Argus is staying with Niam Tais in Little Nova. We don't really know his background. It seems though that he knows Amelia, who is a bully to Hlee specifically. So Hlee is avoiding Argus at this point. She doesn't quite know what their friendship is and what's going on. So we will find out right now. Hlee hid away at the library for days to avoid his phone calls and attempts to visit. Her mother clucked her tongue in disapproval when she skipped out on helping Niam Tais with her garden, but Hlee would rather listen to her mom lecture her on respecting her elders than to see Argus again. The longer she dodged contact, though, the worse she felt. Argus had never made her want to feel invisible, and not because what she did with him didn't matter. Rather, the opposite. She missed Niam Tais too, who made her want to be more comfortable in her own skin, to take pride in everything that made her different. In a year, Hlee would leave Little Nova for college. She couldn't wait to embrace the adventure, to discover who she would become away from this tiny town. People like Amelia didn't care about anything outside of themselves, and even if they did, Hlee didn't want anything to do with it. She wasn't a sidekick in their story. It wasn't her job to take on the burden of their character development. She had her own story to tell, to live, and wherever that took her, she hoped Argus would be a part of it. The following day, Hlee helped her mom prepare Niam Tais' dinner before setting out, backpack stuffed with warm Tupperware. The door to Niam Tais' house was always unlocked except at night, so she let herself in. She could hear the rhythmic sounds of chanting from the altar room, so she unloaded her backpack as quietly as she could. When she peeked into the altar room, to her surprise, Argus sat behind Niam Tais on a low stool. Beside him was a table set with a bowl of uncooked rice, incense tucked into the grains, and a simple meal offering to the spirits. She sucked in her breath at the sight of him, gray and dull, with hollows forming beneath his cheekbones. At the sound, his eyes flew open. His gaze found hers immediately. She offered him a weak smile before fleeing outside. The chickens gathered around her as she sat on the stone mushroom cap and tossed feed into the dirt. Her chest ached, every breath thick with fear. It wasn't long before Argus joined her, looking awkward as he tucked his long fingers into his back pockets. "Niam Tais is trying to heal you," she said. Argus hesitated, and frustration pinched at her temples. Despite spending nearly every day together for the last 2 months, she barely knew anything about his life outside of Little Nova. She only knew that Niam Tais and Argus's father had been friends, and that Argus would leave when his father came for him. "Yeah," he said quietly. He didn't offer anything else. The frustration bloomed into anger. "I'm not stupid, Argus. I can see that you're sick. You need to be in a hospital." "Niam Tais is very skilled," he said in that way he had of never really directly answering anything. It was infuriating. "I know she is," she snapped, "but she's not a licensed doctor. You need medical care." He sighed, his mouth stretching into a smile that made her heart stutter. Sinking onto the stool beside the wooden sculpture, he ran his fingers along the rough lines they'd left with their clumsy carving. "Once my dad comes for me, I'll be fine." "And when will that be?" "I don't know. Soon, hopefully." Despite that, she tried to prepare for the inevitability of his leaving from the moment he'd kissed her. His words still struck her like a physical blow. She felt winded and aching. Soon, hopefully. And then what? "Argus, tell me a story." His eyes widened a little, sparking with surprise and delight. She'd never asked him for a story. She'd always been the one telling them. "Tell me your story," she amended. The joy immediately bled from his expression, and he looked down at his feet. Hlee clenched her jaw. Somehow, she'd known he wouldn't. He still refused, despite that he'd asked for her story the first time they'd met. Despite the time they'd spent together, despite that she now knew the feel of his bare shoulder beneath her palm, the press of his body along hers, the way he tasted with rainwater sliding between their mouths. What was she to him? A summer fling? A way to pass the time until his dad came back to whisk him away to his real life somewhere? She told him so many stories, giving a bit of herself every time. But had they ever been real? Make-believe words for make-believe friends. She rose, steeling herself against the way his eyes followed her, hungry for the sight of her. There's dinner inside. She gestured to the house. Guess I'll see you around. Hlee, wait, he began, before Niam Tais' voice rang from the house, calling his name. She shook her head and hurried away, the weight of Argus's gaze on her back. Even though she knew it was stupid, she willed him to come after her, to call her name again, to do something other than what he did, which was to watch her leave and then turn away to answer Niam Tais. Hlee spent the next week doing everything she could to distract herself from the certainty that with the start of term looming, Argus would be leaving. She cleaned her room, painted a fence with her dad, helped her mom weed the yard. It rained on the last Friday evening of summer break as the sun was setting. The downpour was brief, the clouds dispersing quickly. When Hlee glanced out her window, the faint impression of a rainbow arched across the dusky night sky. Its colors were barely discernible. It looked more silvery than anything, but still, it took her breath away. Before she thought it through, she had her shoes on and was flying out her front door. She had to make sure Argus was seeing this. If nothing else, they'd have this memory of their summer together, like the lunar rainbow, rare and brief, but beautiful. Warm squares of light from the windows illuminated the yard as she approached Niam Tais' house. When she burst inside, though, neither Niam Tais nor Argus appeared to be home. If they'd gone into town, it was possible she'd blown right past them on her bike. Why would they leave all the lights on, though? Her skin prickled with unease as she left the empty house. The lunar rainbow shone overhead, startlingly close, silver rippling in the moonlight, almost like scales. Shaking her head, she wandered past the house, instinct guiding her feet. The glow of the lunar rainbow cast the trees in silver, as if all the woods had been dusted in the strange, luminous shine as they're clearing. Ahead, a familiar voice filtered through the night. She rushed forward, scraping her palm against a sharp branch as she emerged into the clearing. At its center, Niam Tais sat hunched over Argus, who was sprawled on his back, his chest so still that she couldn't be sure he was breathing. His eyes glowed white hot, not a trick of the light this time. Her stomach made an alarmed lurch. Hlee! Argus exhaled her name like a long-held breath. Niam Tais looked up, her cheeks streaked with tears, as Hlee dropped down beside her. With a tremulous smile so unlike her usual confidence, she squeezed Hlee's shoulder and backed away to give them space. What's happening? Hlee asked, her voice high with fear. Her hands flitted from his cheeks to his shoulders, uncertain how to comfort him. I was hoping you'd come, he gasped, as if each word fought to pass his lips. Niam Tais wanted me to leave the second we saw the Emperor's dragon, but I waited. Argus, what are you talking about? She bent low, finally settling her fingers in his hair so that his shallow breast brushed her cheek. I chose to fall, he said, hands sliding up to grip her wrist. He turned his face, pressing bloodless lips to the frantic flutter of her pulse, to meet my mother, without any promise of returning home. At this, Hlee reared back a little, glancing over at Niam Tais. Niam Tais was staring up at the lunar rainbow, face bathed in silver. She chanted softly under her breath. When Hlee followed her gaze, the lunar rainbow had transformed into a massive, sinuous thing, its slick body glimmering. After meeting you, I thought it'd be okay to stay. His voice faded into a hoarse whisper. She swallowed thickly, her breath coming fast and thin. She understood with sudden clarity that this was his only chance. If Argus didn't leave now, he would die, well before the next lunar rainbow. You can't stay, she said, the words breaking inside her. Beside her, Niam Tais fell silent, just as a violent gust of wind howled through the woods. The trees trembled, leaves ripped from their branches, as an enormous serpentine dragon descended into the clearing. Hlee yelped, clutching at Argus as the creature curled its long body into the small space, its scales shivering between silver and every hue of the rainbow. Niam Tais rushed to Argus's other side, jolting Hlee back to her senses. Together, they hauled him onto the creature's back. She didn't let go right away, though, instead burying her face in his shoulder. "Hlee," he whispered against her hair. "Come with me." She drew back, eyes wide, thoughts tumbling through the infinite space of a possibility she never could have imagined. When she looked to Niam Tai, the woman only nodded, hands clasped over her heart. She couldn't, possibly. Could she? Moonlight began to pierce through the dragon's form. She was out of time. She leaped onto its back, wrapped her arms around Argus's waist. His hands found hers, pulling her even tighter against him. To Niam Tai, she said, "My parents." Niam Tai assured her, "Tell the Emperor I want to see you both again." Hlee grinned, a wild energy roaring through her as the dragon rose into the night sky. As Niam Tai and little Nova and all the earth fell away, she thought perhaps this was how Niam Tai's story had been meant to end, and how her own began. The end. So that was Starlight and Moondust by Lori M. Lee. And one extra, fun fact about this story is that Hlee, our main character's name, is actually the Hmong word for moon. So if we had known that from the beginning, we probably would have guessed at what Argus actually was. But it is still fun to find out. All right, thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye.